So now we're moving into chapter 7, which takes us down on that level of organization, and now we're really looking at the small individual pieces. So cell structure and function is going to be what this chapter covers. If you were to look at a bunch of different things under a microscope, what would you see? Would there be things that are similar? Would there be things that are different? What are you actually looking at when you're looking under a microscope? Do different microscopes allow you to look at different things? These are some of the things that we're going to talk about when we start looking at cells. So if we were to look at a lot of things under the microscope, we'd probably be able to see cells. So living things, every part of a living thing is going to be made up of cells. So this is a nice little diagram. We're going to get into more of the bits and pieces and the components of a cell in a little bit later. But just this idea that life is cellular. Living things are made up of cells. So how do we know things are made up of cells? Well, we know now because we can look through a microscope. And it was really the invention of a microscope that led us into this idea that all living things are made up of cells. So let's just talk briefly about how did they discover this. Well, Robert Hooke used a compound microscope and took a very thin slice of cork cells, put it under the microscope, and he observed and he saw all these small little chambers, these empty chambers in there. And it made him kind of think of like the cells in a monastery, and so that's why he called them cells. So this was his original drawing, and this is another kind of important step in the evolution of science. So we've talked before about sometimes there are things out there that cannot be discovered until our technology reaches a point that allows us to do so. And this was one of those things. Before then, they couldn't see it. If you look at your hand closely, can you see the individual skin cells? No, you can see kind of the ridges of like your fingerprints and stuff like that. But you really are not able to see the individual cells. And that's what the microscope allowed us to do. Around that same time, again, due to the advent of the invention of the microscope, other scientists were using the microscope to look at different things. So we also have the first guy up at the top here, Anton van Leeuwenhoek, and he took the microscope and looked at pond water. And he was pretty surprised when he looked at it because there was this world of tiny little microscopic organisms that seemed to be everywhere, even in the water that he drank, different pond water, that type of thing. So this idea that there is many smaller pieces kind of making up the big whole. Then you have a German botanist, Matthias Schleiden, and he concluded that plants were made up of cells. So kind of looking at different plants and decided that they were all made up of cells. Well, then you had Theodor Schwann, who looked at animals and figured out that all the animals were made out of cells. And the last one on our list was Rudolf Virchow, and he was a German physician that when he looked at these cells just figured out that they could be produced only from the division of existing cells. So you have all of these scientists that kind of started to go crazy because now they had a microscope that allowed them to look more in depth into things. And so all these other scientists kind of came together and started gathering information, which led to the cell theory. And cell theory is the fundamental concept about living things. And here are the main components. So all living things are made up of cells. Cells are the basic unit of structure and function in living things, and new cells are produced from existing cells. Now you should be able to answer the first question.